In this lesson, we're taking a look at airspaces, and the best way to take a look at airspace is to simply look at a sectional chart, because this is where all of our airspaces are presented to us. Airspaces are shown on sectional charts for a variety of different reasons, but primarily because this is how we as pilots navigate through the National Airspace System. So let's start with the first airspace, the Class Alpha. The Class Alpha airspace is not depicted on a sectional chart. It begins at flight level 180 and is not permissible to sport pilots, but private pilots with a high altitude endorsement may fly in it. You'll also need an instrument rating because all flights in the Class Alpha are IFR. If you're a sport pilot applicant, you don't need to know that, but if you are a private pilot applicant, you do. But the next airspace that we're going to talk about, just below the Alpha, is the Class Bravo. And here in my home state of Florida, we have 3. Down here in Miami is a perfect example. Class Bravo airspaces are custom designed and tailored for large international airports across the U.S. There's very many of them, and these are very important airspaces to be aware of. A couple of distinctions about the Class Bravo. You must be on an ATC clearance. You have to have a clearance through the Class Bravo. And what that means is you must hear them say your tail number is cleared into the Class Bravo airspace. If you don't hear that, you can't fly in the Class Bravo airspace. And I know looking at this might seem a little confusing because it's this big shape. And by the way, when I talk about the Class Bravo, I'm looking at these dark blue lines all around here. The Class Bravo airspace is designed with different shelves or different altitudes of airspace, and generally speaking, they all go up to the same top altitude and then come down. So in this case, Miami, the airspace goes up to a top altitude of 7,000 feet. I can see that right here by this 70 over 30. That tells me the top altitude is 7,000 because this is always in hundreds of feet. And the bottom altitude of this shelf right here where that 70-30 appears is 3,000 feet. Now, if I come to the east a little bit more, I'll see one more shelf just adjacent to that, and I have another altitude right here that says 70 over 15. So from here, the Class B is 7,000 to 3,000. But in this sliver right here, the altitude drops down from 7,000 to 15,000. To operate in a Class B airspace, as a private pilot, we don't need anything special, but as a sport pilot, you do need an endorsement and ground training and flight training from an authorized instructor. On board your aircraft, you must have a two-way radio and a Mode C transponder. If you don't have those, you can't operate in the Class B airspace. The next airspace we'll look at really quick here is the Class C. Southwest Florida International is a great example of this. Okay, Southwest Florida International is a Class B airspace. Class C airspace, and I can tell this because it has the thick magenta ring around it, the thick magenta lines. Most Class Cs are pretty standard and are designed in a circular shape with an outer shelf and the inner core. The shelf and the core go up to the same altitude, but the core or the inner ring will always go down to the surface above the airport, and the outer ring will usually stop at an altitude well above that. In this case, it's 1,200 feet. That seems to be pretty standard for the Class Charlie airspaces in Florida, at least. To operate in a Class C, more appropriately, airspace, I must have a Mode C transponder and a two-way radio, but instead of being on a clearance, I simply have to have ATC contact. Now, what that sounds like is simply having a controller read back my tail number to me. That's really pretty much all I need to operate in a Class C. In order to operate within a Class D airspace, such as down here in Naples, all I need is a two-way radio. I know this is a Class C airport because there is simply a dashed blue line, or as the FAA calls it, a segmented blue line around the airport, and I must establish ATC contact with the Naples Tower before I can enter their airspace. Now, all other airports in the U.S. drop into one of two different categories. I'm going to zoom in here on my chart, and it's going to change to a half tack here and a half sectional here, but that's fine. For the purpose of this, we're going to look at the following two explanations of the rest of these airports, and this goes for the majority of them. This talks about the Class Golf airspace. If I actually come down here, there's a couple of different small private airports down here in South Florida. These are private. We can't land there. There are no frequencies for them. They're basically good pretty much just for navigational purposes or for emergency operations. And these airports are Class Golf airports with Class Golf airspace going from the surface up to 1,200 feet. That is true for most airspaces. Now, if you get close to a certain airport or a certain kind of airport like Big Cypress here, this shaded magenta ring is known as a Class E transition area. This tells me that the Class E airspace goes down to 700 feet instead of 1,200 above the ground. So I actually lose 500 feet from the Class Golf airspace above this airport. And that's done because the Class Golf airspace has a visibility requirement of 1 statute mile and a cloud clearance requirement of clear of clouds. So for private pilots, you can fly in as poor weather in the Class Golf airspace as 1 statute mile visibility clear of clouds. Remember, sport pilots, you must always have 3 statute mile visibility. Now, to compound this issue a little bit more, these spaces are designed really to help protect instrument aircraft that are arriving into these airspaces. But know that your Class E airspace begins at 700 feet here, whereas here it would begin at 1,200. And the last kind of airport, this one's not very common, but you'll see these from time to time. This dashed line around Dade Collier tells me that this particular airport around the Dade, or the airspace around the Dade Collier airport at least, is all Class Echo. There is no Golf airspace here, meaning that the visibility requirements are 3 statute miles, 500 feet below, 1,000 feet above, and 2,000 foot horizontal to clouds. For more information on VFR weather minimums and VFR weather definitions, make sure you read the text. If you have any questions about airspace, always contact us. I'll see you guys in the next lesson.